Hello, everyone, and welcome to 26 of the Nord Search podcast. Today, excited to talk of all things batteries and energy storage, and I'm joined by a real expert in energy storage today. So thanks and welcome to Lars, Stephan.
Yeah, hi Patrick. Thanks for the invitation to come to your podcast. I listen to it a lot. I think it's always exciting. I'm not a trader. I don't have a trading context, but everything that touches around batteries, you have quite some exciting guests and exciting episodes. So happy to come on and talk a bit about energy storage.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, like I say, thanks for coming on. I'm a big fan of your content on LinkedIn. Obviously, you've got quite a following now, like 20,000 followers, give or take, on LinkedIn. And you're talking about some really interesting topics around batteries, storage, energy transition. And our audience is mainly on the trading side. And my clients, and when I talk to them, a lot of them are so interested in batteries, flexibility. And the German market is the one that everyone is wanting to get access to. So I think, it'd be really good to go into all of that. But I think as we start the conversation, for those who don't know you, it'd be good to get a bit of an intro into your background and what you're really responsible for and what you're really looking at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So maybe in short, I like energy storage and I like to talk about it and educate about it.
Yeah.
I've been in the storage industry for about 10 years. So I would say many would say 10 years ago, energy storage didn't exist yet in that sense. And since then, I mean, continues into today, right? It's like a new technology that is rapidly evolving, changing. The way that we integrate in energy storage markets evolves. We see new applications coming up. And there's just a lot of lack of knowledge I focus on policymakers, right? Regulators, but generally in the market. So talking about educating about the role of energy storage in the energy transition is just something that I find makes a lot of sense. So how did I get there? I'm actually a political scientist. I studied European politics. I worked in communication before, also on EU level. And then about 10 years ago, really by chance, like a friend of mine, I was looking for a job. A friend of mine told me, there's this battery company in energy. Isn't that something interesting for you? And I was like, sure, I don't know what batteries are, but I guess in my interview, I made a good enough impression. I confused megawatt and megawatt hours, so that was a minus. But then on the other side, I explained very well what frequency relation is. Yeah, so I came into energy storage about 10 years ago at a Berlin-based company, Unicos. Back then, when I joined them, they just had commissioned a 5 megawatt battery plant, which was like the largest commercially operated in continental Europe. Actually, I think even including the UK. So they were thinking we're the king of the world with a 5 megawatt battery online, right? And today, we have more capacity in a single container. So the industry has evolved quite a bit. And so in this role, I basically took on policy. And for me, policy is all about markets. So policy sets how can energy storage and other assets participate in the market. It also refers to regulators. So I started back then around integration of energy storage pre-qualification requirements for primary frequency response, the FCR product. There was a big thing back then with the network code system operations about 10 years ago. And I did the same EFR tenders in UK, the emergence of the market there, going into the US, PGM, Reg D signal changes, public procurements of investor-owned utilities in California, storage coming to Australia. So back then I basically covered all of that. And the focus was really always, how can we reduce and lower barriers for energy storage? How can we integrate storage better into the market? And what does it mean for our customers, so investors, traders, how to monetize energy storage? And that was until today, right? This is like what I'm working on. And after Unicos back then was acquired by a diesel generator company, my focus then switched a bit more into strategy development within this company. How does it make sense to integrate energy storage in a portfolio of generator assets and off-grid locations, how to integrate renewables and so on. And about 3 years ago, I then joined Fluence, first in a role, again, market-facing, being the German market expert at Fluence. Since then, I've passed the baton to a colleague. So being a German market expert is more like a private hobby now, because then I moved more into policy, EU policy. And starting this year, I also became responsible for marketing in the EMEA region, which is great because I have an amazing marketing team, which we're really doing an amazing job. So I oversee our marketing, I oversee policy, EU level policy. I do myself a lot going on there at the moment, also in terms of market design and so on. And then I have colleagues across different markets in Europe who also work on policy in this individual markets, and I'm working with them to again like drive policy forward in those specific markets.
Okay. So what are like the main objectives for you then? Like what do you spend most time focusing on?
Yeah, at the moment I would say it is a lot around EU policy. We have European Commission coming in. There are new packages. So Europe is now focusing not only on the Green Deal anymore, but on making it a clean industrial deal. So basically asking ourselves, how can we decarbonize our industry, but at the same time have job creation in Europe and doing it in a sustainable way for European economies as well? How can we faster bring power prices down? How can we strengthen energy security in Europe, which of course we have seen with the Russian gas crisis was a huge problem back then. So at the moment, there are a lot of different policy packages. There's still a lot going on around lowering barriers, around opening up markets across Europe. Storage support schemes is a big thing across some countries. Emergence of capacity markets, both with rules set on EU level, but then also implementation of those from member state. And then there are other topics as well, like how do we bring clean tech manufacturing into Europe? What does it mean for battery, for our supply chain? And then especially the topic of cybersecurity is also one that we're seeing emerging in Europe, right? There's a rising awareness that energy assets, so not just energy storage, but also energy storage, but also wind, solar, that we have supply chain dependencies there as well, and risks in the supply chain that we're introducing to Europe in terms of cybersecurity. So the European Commission is starting to look into that a lot. How do we make energy assets in Europe cyber secure? What we can learn from the United States. So where Fluence found as a joint venture between AES and Siemens. So we have a US European heritage. So a lot of policy and knowledge transfer we can also make from the US into Europe on those topics.
Okay. Yeah, I saw you write about this, and it's not a topic that I know much about, but what things can we learn from the US when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think so we think cybersecurity, first of all, about how does it create value for our customers, right? So having cyber secure systems is important because we see more and more cyber criminal activity, ransomware attacks, which result from a trading perspective, right, in revenue loss if you cannot access your asset. So having a cyber secure system is about ensuring you don't have revenue loss, but then if somebody else takes control of your asset in the worst case, you might also see property loss to your asset, or you might ransom requests like we had the Colonial Pipeline in the US. So this is one element. Another one is around compliance with cyber legislation. So in Europe specifically, we have the Cyber Resiliency Act and the Network Information Security Act, the NIS2, which is currently being implemented on member state level. And we see an increasing awareness of our customers around that, but many are not yet aware. And you have to be compliant. So there are fines of 10 million up to 2% of global revenue if you're not compliant with certain things. And I think this is something where the industry will start to look more and more into. And then the last element is also a question about, will we see more strict guidelines around which IT hard and software components can be deployed in Europe? As an example, in the United States, there's this concept of foreign entities of concern. In Europe, we have now a similar concept where they're basically saying technology from certain suppliers or certain part of the regions is something we don't want to integrate into the critical energy infrastructure in the United States. And I mean, in Europe, we're seeing that as well in the telecom sector, specifically, if you think 5G networks, certain suppliers are not allowed to be integrated into electricity grids anymore. And actually, assets are being replaced, right? I mean, in UK and in Germany, IT equipment in the 5G network is ripped out of the existing systems and new ones put in. So this is also an element of making sure we provide systems without content of potential countries of concern to make the assets of our customers cyber secure. And then I think there is like this larger public policy perspective. How do we ensure security of critical network infrastructure, where we might see a strengthening of policy coming down the line as well?
Yeah, no, interesting. Like focusing on the energy storage market as a whole, like in Europe, like you say, obviously it's from 10 years ago where we started to where we are now, it's transformed hugely. But what is the current state of energy storage in Europe if you were to focus on that?
It's you could say we've come really long way. On the other side, you could also say we're just in the infancy of energy storage if you think about where we're going to go going forward. So going 10 years back, right, we had like a 5 megawatt battery integrated in the continental European grid, and that was amazing. We saw a lot of integration back then in Germany happening with a 90 megawatt portfolio of Steag, which was really large at the time. Then we saw this enhanced frequency response tenders in the UK. Then we saw the DS3 services emerging in Ireland. In the UK, of course, and then we had like other products, the FFR frequency products, capacity markets came in as a revenue stream. So those two markets, especially UK and Ireland, I would say, were growing a lot, whereas Germany, we still saw smaller projects being integrated, but mainly around frequency relation. And this is how it was. We had like a tender here in Italy where some storage was integrated. Some things were put into Switzerland, for example. But like, let's say it took some time. And then I think like a big turning point was actually the energy crisis in Europe. So two things came together, right? On the one side, the cost of battery, of energy storage continued to go down, which is to a large extent driven by cell cost declines, driven by volume in the EV industry. So the cost of storage came down, and all of a sudden we had this huge volatility in the market. So energy storage was not longer about frequency relation, which maybe we'll talk later about market saturation, which is, you could argue, a rather shallow market. But all of a sudden, we saw energy trading, wholesale trading on the day ahead, but also in the intraday emerging. And I think you had the great podcast with Jürgen from Inspired on that, right? Where he talked about that story about how the application of storage moved into energy trading, which is much larger. And then we also had at the same time a point that we have more and more renewables in our grids in Europe, but also in Germany, in the Netherlands. So we see aggressive negative pricing when the sun is shining. Today, the sun is shining. Probably we have negative prices around noon, right? We see larger imbalances driven by the volatility of renewables. So all of this drives the need for more flexibility in the grid, and energy storage is just the right technology at the right time, right? The price is right. It's easily to be deployed. It's fast to be deployed. And that's why we see more and more energy storage going to the grid. So that's where we are today. And what we're seeing going forward, more and more markets popping up in Europe. We have as Fluence assets now deployed in 15 markets in Europe, and there are more markets to come. We see storage being used in the TSO grid context. So we're building 2 grid booster assets in Germany. We're seeing energy storage as part of critical infrastructure. We have built a project in Lithuania, which was used there for the synchronization of the Baltic grid with the continental European grid. We're currently deploying a portfolio of assets into the Ukraine, where it's going to be used to support DTEC's Fight for Light campaign. So to keep the grid stable and running and operating under the strains of war, right? At the same time, we see storage support schemes emerging around Eastern Europe specifically. We see a lot of more market applications being driven across Europe. And so we're going to see a continued escalation or acceleration of storage build out. And just to leave you with one number, right? So let's say 2014, we had 5 megawatt hours of storage in Germany.
Yeah.
End of last year, we had 22 gigawatt hours deployed across Europe. That includes UK, so EU plus UK. Not talking about Middle East. That's a whole different story. And by 2030, we'll have around 324 gigawatt hours of storage in Europe. Right. So today we have 7% of the capacity that will be deployed in European grids in about 6 years' time. We have only 7% where we will be in 2030. And that is really incredible, this growth that is ahead of us as an industry, but of course also for us as Fluence.
Yeah. So yeah, that is crazy when you think about where we're going to be. So what will it look like in 2030? Like, is that what difference to today, like in terms of like prices? Is it going to have a big impact on things like that?
Yeah. So we're going to see technology further advancing, right? I
Yeah.
think there are questions about how much lower can the cost of battery cell continue to be. At the moment, we have large overcapacities in the production China on battery cells, which also has driven a huge cost decline over the last 12 to 18 months. I'm sure there is still potential for further cost declines on the battery cell, but then I think what we're seeing now, it's more about smarter integration, more density, different form factors, battery cells that have more cycles, so the lifetime of the battery cells are more, the whole digital component is playing in, and maybe we'll talk a bit about that, what digital actually does in changing energy storage. So I think we see that on the technology side, it's going to continue. On the market side, I think energy storage is going to take more and more responsibility in the grid. We're going to replace rotating masses. Storage will have to provide inertia services. We have already grid codes requiring that. We have the first systems built and required no market mechanisms emerging in the UK and in Germany about grid forming, for example. And then I think we're going to see energy storage, the systems getting longer durations. So at the moment, typically in Europe, you would probably deploy 2-hour assets. Some markets will deploy something else, right? In Germany, we're building a 4-hour asset at the moment for Icony, but we're probably going to move into longer duration assets because the cost of storing in a megawatt hour through is getting lower, which means you can operate commercially successful with lower price spreads in the wholesale market. So we're probably going to see this. As we switch off conventional generation, we also have a higher need for dispatchable capacity. So really bridging longer periods of time. We see certain markets like in the UK, Ireland and Italy, specific long duration storage tenders emerging. So for them, long duration is 8 hours. And honestly, 8-hour systems, this will be lithium ion from a commercial perspective. 8 hours, nobody's going to outcompete lithium ion. So we're probably going to see these kind of systems emerging. We already see that in Australia. First, our 8-hour assets are being built in Australia. So probably storage will more and more going to day ahead trading, larger energy shifting. But because we are continuing to build more and more renewables, storage will also come in to manage the imbalances, to go into continuous markets trading, to balance out portfolios.
Yeah.
All in all, a great trajectory ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'd be good to talk about, obviously, Germany, as you were an expert, still are an expert in the German market. Because from my side, obviously, I speak to trading houses every day in the energy space, and especially on power side, they all talk to me about batteries and Germany. Right? They all want to enter that market. They all want to participate in that market. Why is that? If we could go into a little bit around where we are today in Germany and where we potentially, why is it more interesting than the UK, for example, to these trading houses?
Well, I would say, I mean, the UK is already a much more mature market. If you look at the interconnection pipeline in the UK, it's much larger. If you look at the existing storage fleet and the storage fleet under construction right now, it's much larger in the UK. However, at the moment, well, they're going through a revenue lull in some way. So I think there is a larger question about how much storage can the UK market still take, and I think a lot. But as you start and investors start to build up their portfolio, right? They don't want to put all eggs in one basket, so they want to diversify. And if you look about where do you go in a continental European based perspective, you go to Germany. It's huge renewable ambition. It's a very liquid market, large market. It's a natural step. We don't have a lot of utility. Well, I mean, a lot depends, right? I think we have around 2 gigawatt of utility scale storage in Germany at the moment. We actually have a lot of residential storage, but that's maybe a different question about how realistically or which role will residential storage really be able to take in terms of energy market integration? That is, I think, something that we'll have to find out going forward. But so there is this huge fundamental aspect in the German market. At the same time, at the moment, you see really high revenues, right? So that is very exciting. I would say the flexibility issue in Germany at the moment is actually getting bigger as we speak. So last year, for example, in Germany, where I think we integrated around 16 gigawatt of new solar, around 3.5 gigawatt or so of new wind, and only 500 megawatt of batteries. So if you think about what does it mean if the sun is shining and you install 16 gigawatt of additional solar over a year's time, well, it probably means that you have an extra 12 gigawatt or so of solar generation, right? So
yeah,
the problem is getting bigger. We're also seeing grid congestion remaining a huge problem and concern in Germany, which is related to a lot of renewable curtailment that we have, a lot of curtailment costs that we have based on that in Europe and Germany. And we're really talking about billions of congestion costs annually, which then also drives basically market design. So big question, should we have or will we have a price zone split in Germany? Are there other ways to change the market design, dynamic grid fees, for example, local flexibility markets, market-based congestion management, clearer price signals for demand and generation where they should go in the grid. So there's probably some changes coming down the line. From a storage perspective, there's always the challenge, do those changes make sense for energy storage? And does the regulator and policymaker probably use storage to overcome those challenges? And I would say in many ways at the moment they are not. If I think about grid fee, if I think about the famous German Baukostenzuschuss, like a one-off connection fee, those are at the moment incentivizing storage to go into places where it doesn't make sense from a system perspective. It might make sense from a grid perspective. So it's really the question, are we optimizing the grid, the power system, or the energy system? And depending on what you want to optimize, you will come to very different answers and solutions to the market design question. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like the high prices, like what's the reason for that? And do you think that you will continue to see these high prices in Germany?
Yeah. So I think it's a mix of both, right? It's high prices and it's low prices.
Yeah.
So we have seen a record number in Germany last year. So we have prolonged periods of negative prices. And then especially in the autumn and winter, we also had periods of high prices, right?
Yeah.
So price setting in those periods is always based on gas prices. Gas prices creeped up over the autumn, over the winter, which resulted in really high prices. At the same time, I think there have been discussions around the prices should actually have not been as high. Was maybe capacity withheld from the market to drive higher prices? I think there are some investigations going on. But ultimately, I would say, right, talking to traders, high prices is not a problem, right? It's like a function of the market to incentivize investments. If you think of like average prices across the year, because we have so many periods with negative or low prices, it's fine to have periods with high prices. I think then it's just a question, how do you hedge your own supply? How much flexibility can you have to not consume when prices are high? If you actually have cost reflectiveness of high prices, right? Dynamic retail tariffs in Germany are not so well known. We don't have a really good smart meter rollout. So all of that plays in that, of course, as well. I think one concern that I would maybe see is that those high prices might result in market intervention from policymakers, which will not be beneficial to the German energy system. So one clear example is that the new German government, which is currently being built, right? They had like a paper, like 10 pages, what they want to do. And for example, there they said, we want to take capacity, which was taken off the market to stay off the market, only be activated by TSOs in case of actually severe threats to the stability of the system. They now want to activate them during high price periods, which probably the European Commission is not going to allow because those assets were taken off the market. They're receiving payments for being off the market as well, right? But of course, if you then throw in other assets to bring down high prices, you're again taking away the incentive to build actually assets which can provide this dispatchable energy. which is both energy storage, but also demand response. But also, I mean, in Germany, we talk about we need to build gas peakers. The last government said we need 10 gigawatt. The new government is saying we need 20 gigawatt. We want to have a capacity market. Again, all of this will depend on what the European Commission and state aid procedures actually allow them to do. And I think they're not going to allow what the new government wants. But this is also meant to bring down prices, to bring dispatchable capacity in the grid. But now if you make a market intervention, again, you're reducing the incentive of somebody to actually build something on a market basis. And you have to dole out more subsidies for people to build capacity. And I think the great thing about energy storage is we don't need any subsidies, like especially in Germany, right? Yes, if there's a capacity market, would be great to get that contracted revenue stream, which is not a subsidy. It's a payment you get for a service that you're going to provide, right? But like storage is being built because people want to invest, put their money into storage, into Europe, earn attractive returns. And we shouldn't undermine that with policy action, which are counter intuitive to this ramp up of energy storage in Germany and fairly in any storage market around Europe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of my audience and clients I speak to are, when they want to look at batteries, they're really interested in tolling batteries from a trading side. Obviously, it might be different from an asset owner side. But have you got any views on like whether tolling is, a good thing, or does it make any impact?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's, I think, the question, how do we bring those both sides together, right?
Yeah.
So on the one side, you have traders, they want flexibility in their portfolio because they probably have like big imbalance risks in their portfolio because they have a lot of renewables. So energy storage, they can use it as a physical hedge in their portfolio and the trading strategies, fully understand that. And that's what we actually also see from a customer perspective. There are some customers, like big utilities with their own trading desks, they build batteries and put them as flexibility in their own trading desks. On the other side, we see financial investors who build a battery and then give it today often to an algo trader or like to intraday trader, right? To realize revenues in the market. Fundamentally, the batteries are doing exactly the same, right? There will be imbalances from renewables. And either you use the battery within a portfolio to manage your own portfolio, or you do it against the continuous intraday market where people who don't have the flexibility in their portfolio go to clear off their imbalances, right? So fundamentally, those batteries are doing the same. I think the really exciting piece is where you bring both of those things together, like having battery in a big renewable portfolio, manage your own risk, your own imbalance, and put the remaining part of your flexibility that you might not need in the next hour into the market and help others to optimize that. And I think this is probably what a lot of traders want to be doing, right? To dip into those both pieces. When I look at like tolling, I would always say everybody wants a tolling agreement when the revenues are low, but when the revenues are high, why would you do a tolling agreement? Because you're losing the upside. And I think this is maybe a bit of the problem why we don't see more tolling in Germany yet. But then I guess it also depends on the financing needs of the investor. Depending on how you put your debt structure together, you might actually be interested in a tolling agreement, basically until you paid off your debt from your project. And then when your equity, you might be more willing to take more risk on. So in Germany, we actually now see the first tolling agreements as well.
Yeah.
NOFA has a 7-year tolling agreement with an unnamed major global energy corporation for like a 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour asset. So they have a fixed rate tolling agreement. Another example is Icony. Actually, we're building a battery for them. It's a 50 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour battery. And they have a 5-year tolling agreement with Deutsche Bahn Energie. So they're optimizing their own energy portfolio, of course. And they gave them 35 megawatt out of the 50 megawatt on the tolling agreement. And they're keeping the other 15 megawatt to optimize it themselves. And I think that is quite interesting because what we're probably going to see with tolling agreements, there will be a huge variety, right? You can have like a flat tolling agreement. You might like have just a floor, or you have some agreement for a higher level, and then you have an upside, a revenue sharing approach. So you can, I guess, do that in a single tolling contract, or you can split up your asset and put parts of your asset into different contractual schemes to manage your risk and manage your project finance. And I think it will be quite interesting to see how that continues. And I think then, especially in tolling agreements, I think a lot of interesting pieces will, of course, be how do you structure it? How many cycles are you allowed to run? Are you allowed to run a third cycle if the revenues are high? How do you
Yeah.
manage availability of the asset? What is the cost of the additional kilowatt hour or megawatt hour energy throughput on a specific day? How does that maybe impact the degradation of the battery, the state of health of the battery? So I think then it gets very, very interesting about bringing all this data together to make an
Yeah.
optimal trading strategy with that battery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I think just going off like conversations I've had, especially at eWorld, like, you know, with trading houses, there was so much interest in like we want tolling agreements in Germany, but then at the moment we haven't seen that many actually done yet. So that I know behind the scenes there's so much appetite from the trading house to make it happen, but the deal flow is not really that strong yet.
Yeah.
So I wonder in the next 6 months, 12 months, whether we're actually going to see more and more of these deals being done.
I mean, I would expect more of those deals being done. I think it's also part of the maturing of our industry that
Yeah.
that both sides actually get comfortable with tolling agreements. I mean,
Yeah.
for a trade, I mean, an asset owner probably wants a tolling agreement for as long as possible, whereas the trader, of course, the
Yeah.
longer you guarantee something, the more uncertainty you get
Yeah.
into what will happen in 3, 4, 5 years. Can you
Yeah.
put that into the tolling agreement somehow as well?
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter also of the industry maturing
Yeah.
about all affected parties getting more comfortable around future outlook on volatility, get more comfortable about
Yeah.
technology. Am I really willing to make a tolling agreement with an asset, which I don't understand really from a technology perspective, right? So I think the industry is maturing and we'll probably see more and more tolling agreements going forward as well. But at the same time, we'll see people who just go short-term trading strategies. We'll see people who use the battery fully in their portfolio. We'll see others
Yeah.
who maybe have a mix and match of both of those things. And I think this is also interesting because different investors, different actors have different needs. They will find different solutions to monetize their battery, which makes, again, the industry actually the more exciting to think about how all of that works together.
Yeah, something I find really interesting as well is when it comes to optimizing and monetizing the flexibility on the battery, like how sophisticated the companies are in their approach in terms of like fully automated trading approaches.
Yeah.
Like I know some entrants into the market in the last year or two who are like absolute machine learning geniuses, and they've not really got that fundamental understanding or experience in batteries, but they see the opportunity. They think that their technology experience, especially in like AI and machine learning, can really have a big impact here. So yeah, I think the sophistication of how it's optimized is a super exciting space, and it's getting really competitive, which is going to help with innovation.
Yeah, and you actually see the same kind of innovation on the technology side as well, right? And you can always say how much AI and machine learning buzzwords, right? But in the way that we as a technology company manage the battery, manage the lifetime of the battery, allow our customers to use flexibility from it, how we structure guarantees, which are then also relevant for traders to know better how much energy do I get off one of my asset, how do we increase the availability to make sure the battery is actually there when you want to be using it. I think all of this is really really exciting, and I mean that's where we invest a lot of time and money as well with our teams. And I mean we just launched a new product, we call it Smart Stack because it's really smart. It's like has guarantees which are industry leading for now. I mean, we typically expect that others will follow up because innovation is something that will be replicated by others, right? But like all of those really automated battery analytics, and from this analytics, having actions being taken, for example, in terms of SOC balancing, or energy balancing in batteries, all of that is becoming automated. The battery does it by itself, right? Increasing the certainty about, and all of that increases the certainty about how much energy can I actually get out of my asset. We are putting guarantees against it, because it's fine to say my asset is great, but I'm not guaranteeing, I'm not putting it in contract. So we're putting it in contract. So we actually have to pay penalties if we don't fulfill our promises, right? And I think this is really interesting how the product side also drives this kind of innovation. And I think this will get more and more important going forward, because the cost of a battery is actually already pretty low, and the reducing further the capex of a battery still makes an impact on your business case. But what we are actually seeing is like having a longer lifetime of the asset, having the ability to generate more revenues when revenue potential is there. This is going to have a much larger impact on the overall business case of batteries going forward. And really very interesting to lean into those things and those developments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Something else you mentioned earlier with just around the digital aspect that you're seeing right now. So can we go into that topic a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I guess I touched a bit on it already. So I mean, a battery is fully digital, right? And at the moment, we often see with legacy technology, I mean, they're just technology problems which then impact the availability or the data certainty that you have on dispatchable energy. To take a very simple example, right? The industry moved away from NMC cells to LFP cells. And in the industry, it's well known that it's much more difficult to understand how much energy do I actually have in my battery with an LFP cell. So this called state of charge is measured based on cell voltage, and the cell voltage curve of an LFP cell is way different than that from an NMC cell. So we have areas where there is not a lot of variation in the voltage between, let's say, 60% and 80% state of charge. So it's getting more and more complicated to actually know how much energy do I actually have in my battery right now. And that, of course, impacts how much energy can I actually trade off my battery. And when we talk to our customers, and there's actually data out there from battery analytics companies as well, like Twice, for example, they said that on a regular basis, customers are holding or withholding somewhere between 10 and even up to 25% of the capacity that they think they might have, because they have realized I bid the capacity and then the battery couldn't deliver it because I had problems. I had the wrong information about how much energy I have in my battery, or maybe I have stranded energy in my battery. So if, like, for example, on a rack, maybe I have one battery with a very low voltage measurement. That means the whole rack is taken off, because I don't want to thread this battery pulling more out of it, and it might not be healthy for the battery. But then I might have other battery cells in the same rack, which still have much more energy. So I have stranded energy in it. And this is a concern for our customers, because they have a battery and now they can only dispatch less megawatt hours out of this battery. So how we, for example, tackle this? First of all, better sensors, much more detailed sensors, but then having much more intelligence in the BMS, in the individual battery. In the battery, we automatically run analytics, so it's not data being sent to a 24/7 sender, but the battery itself, the battery block, it runs automatic analytics, and it runs automatic measures to bring the SoC back in line, to balance the state of charge between different battery cells. And all of this is really happening automatically now, right? There is no active engagement needed anymore. The battery does it by itself, which means all of a sudden we have a much higher certainty about how much energy you can actually dispatch from the battery. And like in that, for example, we now introduced something we call dispatchable energy capacity, and we're putting a guarantee 25%, and we're reducing the certainty to 8% now in a guarantee, where if we don't fulfill this, then we have to pay the penalty for it. Okay. And I think this is just one tangible example about how this analytics is really driving better asset performance. Predictive maintenance, which I think is a super exciting topic as well, just to quickly dive into it. So we have an asset management performance platform called Nispera, and they actually come from the wind and the solar space, and we have it now also on batteries. And these platforms, basically, they take all the thousands of measuring points of battery plant, and they might see there is a certain kind of a voltage fluctuation in an inverter. And in the past, we've seen, if we see this kind of pattern, this might mean we have a failure in a specific piece of the inverter. So instead of waiting for failure to happen, before we didn't have those measuring points, right? Now we have analytics which tell us, I have those measuring points over the last 2 weeks, voltage fluctuations look like this. This indicates, let's say with an 80% probability, this inverter will have a failure within the next 2 weeks. So we dispatch like the maintenance crew before an inverter failure happens, which then of course ramps up the availability of the overall asset, right? And there's many of those just data-driven analytic things that can take place now. And there are companies, of course, entering that space, like Twace, for example. We're doing it all in-house ourselves, having much more detailed, granular access to the data. And so all of those world of analytics, of machine learning, of AI is also really coming big time into how we build and operate assets. And I think that is quite exciting as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. On the topic of AI, something that I've had quite a few discussions about, more so with US power trading guests, it is the power demand for the AI data centers are obviously needing. It's like nothing that we've ever seen before. Obviously, the US are a bit further ahead in that area. Like all the big AI companies are obviously from the US, are doing a lot of their data centers in the US, but it's going to obviously also, like, Europe's not going to be one who be left behind when it comes to AI. I think the governments have made that clear. So it'd be interesting to get your views on how that's going to change things with this enormous demand for power, not something that we've seen before or for a long time. Like how is that going to impact like how we actually get this power? Like what is the energy? How big a role is renewables going to have in that? Is it going to change, the views on how we get this demand actually met?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and I can tell you a bit from what we're seeing in the US. I mean, I'm based in EMEA, so my visibility there is a bit limited. But what we actually see, as you say, right, a lot of demand is driven by AI, by data centers. And the fastest way to fulfill this demand is renewables plus storage. I mean, if you look on LinkedIn, at least in my bubble, maybe there are so many people say, oh yeah, we're going to build nuclear power plants and smart nuclear reactors and so on. But like, yeah, I mean, building a nuclear power plant takes 10 years, right? Smart nuclear reactors don't exist yet, really. You don't know what the energy cost will be. What we know is how to build solar. What we know is how to build wind and batteries. And this is what's happening right now. So actually, today I came across this data that 94% of new build capacity into the energy system in the United States last year in 2024 was solar, wind, and batteries. And I think then 6% was new gas peakers. So this is what being built. We also see that in concrete projects. So the largest battery we have actually built globally so far is a 300 megawatt, 1,200 megawatt hour battery, which is built, well, for Ørsted, they have like a 300 megawatt PV farm. And with this battery, they power a data center, which is close by. So that's what they're doing. I think it's somewhere in the Sun Belt. So of course you have a lot of solar there on site. But this is how we're currently seeing data center demand will be fulfilled by renewables. Even though yes, those companies are also looking, is there like maybe an old nuclear power plant that I can refurbish or something like this? But the majority of the load will really be driven with renewables. I don't know the exact numbers, but we've communicated, or our CEO has also communicated before in our earnings call, that there is actually a sizable share of our pipeline connected to powering data centers. So bringing the discussion into Europe, we don't see the same trends in Europe yet. We do see in specific countries like Ireland, for example, that it's getting more and more difficult to put data centers into the grid because the grid is congested. And what we're seeing there is that they're actively looking into the solution. How can battery storage help me actually to overcome the grid congestion? Because the grid congestion, like load driven, I think especially around Dublin, a lot of data centers being built, it's load driven. So there will be certain periods of time where I don't have the capacity for my data center. So can I bridge this with a battery? Which role can batteries also play to improve the capability of the grid to transfer more energy through it? And I think these are things we're currently seeing in Europe. I think from another question, I guess, is where will data centers be located? Are we going to put like a data center into Germany and then build a transmission line from Germany to Norway to get their cheap hydropower, or we're going to put the data center into Norway and then build a glass fiber cable into Germany to bring the data there. I think this is probably then also a big question where in Europe we might want to consider, where do we place the renewables, where do we place data centers, how do we get it together? And there, of course, Europe is a much more interconnected grid. The distances are much smaller in Europe compared to the United States. So we might take a bit of a different view, but or a different path. But I think we were going to see load growth. We need to electrify heating. We need to electrify mobility. We have the data center demand, of course, as well. And yeah, this will have to be satisfied, or this demand needs to be supplied with renewables, and energy storage will come alongside with them.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting space right now, because obviously the customers that we're talking about are Google, are Meta, are, you know, Tesla, who have billions and billions on their balance sheet, and they are all trying to win this race, and they can't afford to wait for technology like, you know, new nuclear that will take 20 years. They have to get energy sources that can power today, not like they can't think in 3 years' time, because then they'll lose track against their competition. So I think that's really interesting. Like you say, that the renewables is like probably the faster route to market, but also I think they're looking at reliability a lot as well. And someone in the US that I was speaking to, they were saying that that's why like deals like gas-fired power plants are being looked at now, because they, I think Meta, like they just did a huge deal in the US for a gas-fired power plant, just because they need that power, so reliable, and they want it cheap. So it's kind of, he said those kind of deals weren't being done 12 months ago from an origination standpoint. But now it's like changing what's actually being considered, which I wonder will be looked at in Europe as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this as well. And I mean, let's see if this will become a trend. I think in the United States, of course, you have the lowest gas prices globally, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, yes, a gas peaker, I mean, in Germany, we're saying our building gas peakers takes 5 to 7 years. Don't know, you can probably do it faster, right? But then, of course, if you have a low fuel cost, I think in Europe, I mean, this is what we're struggling with, even now with the energy crisis, right? The big dependency on gas as the price setting asset. We talked about it before, that in Germany, we had like those high price peaks because of the gas prices. So I don't think in Germany you would want to provide a base load to your system with gas. I think there is an ongoing question also in the German market design. Should we have hydrogen-ready peakers, or should we have gas peakers with carbon capture storage technology? Caveat is both of them don't really exist in industrial scale, right? So we're saying, oh, we need this, but it doesn't really exist again. But those assets, I mean, they're the cheaper, the less you operate them, I would say, because they're just very expensive to operate. And so I think the first element will always have to be building renewables, building interconnection, strengthening interconnection. I mean, huge topic in Europe, right? Because the sun might not be shining in Germany, but it might be shining in, I don't know, in the UK or in Spain and Italy, right? And using this interconnection, and I think this again will drive and strengthen the renewable build out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think it's going to be a really interesting topic, because we have different problems in Europe, or different opportunities as well that they do in the US. So yeah. Awesome. Well, look, thanks for your time there, Lars. There was quite a few, topics that we covered there, and like I say, I know there's a lot of interest in energy storage from a trading perspective. So, do appreciate your expertise on that.
Yeah, always happy to talk about energy storage and share my knowledge. So, thanks for the invite, and it was really good talking to you.
My pleasure.